Genesis chapter 24. That's where we're going to be studying. This is actually part 2 of our lesson. We're looking at the marriage of Isaac. And last time we came together, we looked at how Abraham was spending what some of you might call his retirement years. In our text, Abraham is probably 160 years old. And when many of you start slowing down at 60 years old, it appears Abraham is just getting started. Abraham was old, as the text says. Well, I'm just saying I'm not going to have any excuses on our work day out of you, Mike, okay? So I'm priming the pump here. Abraham, hey, verse 1 says Abraham was old and advanced in age, but despite being old, verse 1 says that the Lord blessed Abraham in every way. And in turn, Abraham sought ways to join God's powerful work. I think many of you can look back on your years and see the ways God has blessed you, and blessed you in many ways, and take a look at Abraham's life here and see how he honored God for it. First 9 verses really tell us how Abraham planned on doing that. And some of you might be asking the question, how do I honor God even though my best years may appear to be behind me, my strongest years? And our text kind of shows us how Abraham was able to do that. Abraham wanted to find a bride for his son. And he didn't want to just find any bride for his son. He wanted to find a woman who also had the same kind of religious heritage. And he also wanted to find a woman that would be good for his son and his future generations. And so he told his servant to find a bride for his son, Isaac. He said, not amongst the Canaanites, but amongst Abram's own kindred. My main takeaway from that first 9 verses was that Abraham, though he is old, he remained committed to serving the Lord throughout his entire life. In his old age, he was limited on how he might do that. But one thing he can do is he can make sure that he would leave behind a godly heritage. As I look around our church, one thing I am incredibly grateful for are the grandparents here that share the same vision as Abraham. Some of you grandparents work overtime on making sure that you leave behind a godly heritage, and God bless you all for that. The Bible tells us that if we train up a child in the way that he should go when he's old, he will not depart from it. That is valuable advice. If you train a kid up to be spoiled, then obviously when they're old, the only thing they're going to be is spoiled, right? Yep. It's really just practical information, but especially regarding a Christian lifestyle. If you raise a kid in the church, you train them up in the church, they might look like the church when they get older, and that's not a bad thing. Here, Abraham, he goes one step further. He participates in a mate selection for his son. The part that saddens me within the church is the fact that parents nowadays, they don't work hard enough in helping their children find the right mate. Parents don't work hard enough helping their kid to secure a godly mate. And if you're a parent in here today and you have young children, you say, how can I do that? How can I work towards helping my child secure a godly mate without making my child despise me or select some kind of death metal hair guitarist in spite of me? You can have prayer. That's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one.
But might I suggest we do what Abraham does? Be sure you keep your children plugged into a godly heritage. See, he sought a mate amongst his kindred, people who knew Yahweh, knew of Yahweh. Abraham told his servant, don't go find one of them Canaanite Jezebels to marry my son. We don't want him falling in love with some pagan worshiper, right? And the Bible is pretty clear throughout history. Anytime the Hebrews would intermarry with Canaanites or one of these Gentile nations that worship pagans, it tended to pull their kids away from godly heritage, and their kids pursued those pagan relationships, and it ultimately destroyed their nation time and time again. As your pastor, I'd tell you, be sure that you're not turning your kids loose to pagan worshiping Canaanites. Often we wonder why our children select the boyfriends or the girlfriends that they do, but I want you to know this. If you were to examine the circles in which your children hang out, then it'd be obvious why they select the men or women that they select for a mate. I say that you should have a better influence on the circles in which your children hang out. Then you can have a better influence on the mate that they pick to be their own. And so at any rate, this chapter is about Isaac finding a bride. And his father is assisting in this mission. And I want you to notice in verse 8 of Genesis chapter 24 what Abraham says there. He says that he doesn't want this woman to be forced or bought with a price for this marriage. He wants a woman that is willing to want his son. And he says if the woman is not willing to follow his servant back home, then the servant will be free from this mission. He's given her free will. This is not an arranged marriage. This is not Rebecca for sale. This is not some kind of relationship that is won over by financial gain for the parents or even the children. There's no leverage. There's just only love is what Abraham is seeking for his son, and I think that's sweet. How often these days does it appear that a woman, her love, can be purchased? I don't know if any of you do the TikTok. Any of you do the reeling? Yeah, well, God bless both of you, but I'm pretty sure the rest of us land in the other circle. When you go swiping through stuff, you can't help but get into your feed sometimes. You get these weird clips that rot your brain. Sometimes there's women on there that says, oh, when I select a husband, he better make 7 figures a year. He better make $1 million a year, or I'm not going to marry him. His house better be worth $1 million, or I'm not going to marry him. And I mean, this is a culture. This is a literal culture now that is obviously doing its best to destroy what God planned to be the family unit. There's even a term for them, gold diggers. You ever heard that one? Now, I agree in part with what these women are trying to say. I just don't think they've had the right guidance in knowing how to say it. I agree that a man needs to be able to not only provide for himself, but he also needs to be able to provide for the person he wishes to marry before he should be allowed to marry. I think a boy needs to be a man before he takes a wife to be his woman. But the demands these days are absolutely ridiculous. 6 figures is a minimum in most circles for some of these ladies. And some men don't ever want to leave their parents' couch. They don't even care to have a job. The Bible teaches that when selecting a mate, there are things equally important than just financial provision. We will see that today in our selection of Rebekah as a wife for Isaac. So let's pick up our study in verse 9, and let's look at the commitment the servant made to his master in great detail. I'll read first couple of verses, and then we're going to dive in. So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and he swore to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took camels from the camels of his master, and he went with all kinds of good things of his master's in his hands. And so he rose and he went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. And he made the camels to kneel down outside the city by the well of water at evening time, the time when the woman go out to draw water. And he said, O Yahweh, my God, the God of my master Abraham, please cause this to happen before me today, and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by a spring of water, and the daughters of men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now may it be that young women to whom I say, please let down your jars so that I may drink. And she says, drink, and I will give water to your camels to drink also. May she be the one on whom you've decided for your servant Isaac, and by this I'll know that you have shown loving kindness to my master. Miss Christine, our first slide. The obedient servant. Not yet. There you go. As discussed last week, the servant, he placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and he swore to him concerning this matter. He placed his hand under Abraham's thigh. That was like placing your hand over your heart. You're swearing by something deep and intimate, and like a pinky promise if you're a girl in here, but it's also like a good old-fashioned spit handshake if you're a guy in here. That's what it means, put your hand under his thigh and make this vow. In the Old Testament, if a man made a serious oath, he didn't just say, I promise. He did this. He placed his hand under the thigh of the person who he was making the vow to, and he swore before God, his future, his family, his name, all of that was on the line. And today, what we have, I believe, are watered-down versions of that. Kids will spit in their hands and they will shake on it, or they will make a pinky promise because they're trying to say that this isn't casual. I mean this. But how many times do you just hear people say, I'll do it, I promise? I promise I'll do it. I promise. We hear that all the time. Oaths are not what they used to be. The servant was swearing an oath that he will head into the land of Nahor in the region of Mesopotamia, and he'll find a wife for Isaac. And for this journey, the servant would have to take 10 camels from his master, and he's also going to have to take all kinds of goods from his master to make the trip. And in order to avoid calling him the servant all service long, does anyone remember what this servant's name was, or what we believe his name was? Chief of staff for Abraham, Eleazar. The age is about right. He's probably in his 80s. So Eleazar, what he did is he took many camels, he took lots of supplies and money for this journey, because I don't know if you know this, but what Abraham is asking this 80-year-old spring chicken to do is go 500 to 600 miles away. It's probably going to take you 3 or 4 weeks just one way to get there. And I want you to find one woman amongst many women that's going to be the perfect bride for my son. Do you see why now an oath is important? Can you imagine how far he'd have gone without the oath? Would he turned around at 100 miles? This ain't worth it. It ain't even my wife I'm picking out here. I'm going all this way to get a woman for another man. I'm single. I don't think it was Eleazar's intent to show up Mesopotamia and draw a lot of attention to woo Rebekah by his wealth. I don't think that's the reason why he took all these camels with him. I don't think that's why he took all these goods with him. I think he took all these camels and he took all these goods with him is because, let's get real, this is a 2 to possibly 3 month journey. He's going to need fresh legs for his animals, and he's going to need lots of food. He's going to need money to buy things to survive on that road. With all that in mind, I want to look at the oath again. Do you see now why it's such a big deal to get Eleazar to swear to this journey? It's not just some simple trip across town. This was a mission. And when that servant put his hand under Abraham's thigh, he wasn't agreeing to something small. He was committing to a 500-mile journey into an unknown territory. It could be dangerous. The weather could be unfavorable. It's definitely going to be tiresome. He's not even going to have the luxuries that he enjoyed in Abraham's home. The road is not a comfortable place. Real commitment is measured by the distance you're willing to travel in obedience. I would say this, the Bible warns about making oaths. It teaches that you should let your yeas be yeas, your noes be noes. But we should avoid making oaths if at all possible. Because typically when an oath is made, it's serious and difficult. If it were not serious and it were not difficult, then the oath would not be necessary. Eleazar becomes a model for what true oath keepers are to look like. Not only did Eleazar take the oath, that's the easiest part of the whole thing, is taking the oath. Saying I promise is the easy part, right? Keeping that promise is where it gets tough, right? But it's his follow-through that makes him special. It's in the follow-through that most people fail. Eleazar considered that what all was being asked of him before he sat down beside Abraham, before he put his hand where he needed to make the oath. He's in his 80s when his master asked this of him. He had to consider his personal limitation. He had to consider his personal sacrifices. He had to consider the cost of the trip in itself. And so his plan included 10 camels and a bunch of other supplies. Might I suggest to you, church family, when you make a vow or an oath, I want you to stop and just consider your personal limitations. Stop and consider your personal inconveniences. You need to stop and consider the expense. You need to count the total cost of what it is to make that commitment before you take the endeavor. Oath keeping is not what it used to be because I believe people don't do this. Today, saying I promise is not as binding as culture made it in these days. A person in these days was forced to sit down, look the other person in the eye, make intimate contact, and say, I swear. If the world has abandoned the severity of oath keeping today, I think the church should do its best to represent it the way the Bible does. And so, upon Eleazar's commitment, he gathered his travel things, and he arose, and he went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. Once there, he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at evening time, the time when the women would go out and draw water. And that brings us to our next point, number 2, Christine. And he said, O Yahweh, the God of my master Abraham. How about this? Some of you are on this track. When seeking a godly mate, you should start right here where Eleazar started. What did he do after he made the oath? He prayed. Let's pray about it. I want to read the prayer fully for you. O Yahweh, the God of my master Abraham, please cause this to happen before me today, and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by a spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now may it be that the young woman to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I will give you water to your camels to drink also. And may she be the one whom you have decided for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown loving kindness to my master. Look at how he started this sincere petition. What is the first word, or nay, what is the first letter that comes at that prayer? Oh Yahweh, the God of my master Abraham. When you find yourself in need, how often do you take the extra time to consider who it is that you're asking? He doesn't just say Lord, he doesn't just say Father. He says, oh. He's signaling direct and personal address. This is not a casual prayer. It really carries a tone of urgency, but most importantly, it carries a tone of dependence. He then invokes the name of Abraham as the reason for his petition, and that's kind of a big deal considering he's the one carrying the covenant promises of God. Abraham is the one who the Lord said that is going to father a great nation. He's, I'm coming to you, Lord, because you promised to bless Abraham and his seed. The servant is saying, I'm not asking for prayers for myself. I'm seeking on behalf of the one you already intend to bless. I think if Christians would pray that way today, if they'd say, Lord, I'm not asking for healing or provision for myself. I'm seeking on behalf of another. And Lord, I know you desire to do both for them because your word says this much. How often do our prayers center around us and our own needs, but we forget about the people around us who also have the same needs we have? Whatever you need for yourself, I can promise you everybody around you is likely in the same need. Good servants think about the people around them and their needs. Consider them first. I think that's what we could take away from Eleazar's petition here. Notice how Eleazar continues to petition God. He says this. What's the magic word, Miss Elizabeth? Please. He says, please. May we never become too entitled to say please to our God. Amen. May we never forget that we're at the mercy of God's intervention and he doesn't owe us anything. Eleazar goes on to say, cause this to happen before me today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Notice how Eleazar is not afraid to ask for a sign here. It's not some jumbo miracle like some extreme weather event. It's not some miracle beyond comprehension. It'll be a simple yet undeniable sign that says she's right for Isaac. And it's not for his own sake. He seeks a sign for someone else's, for his master Abraham. Notice how Eleazar appeals to the character of God. He knows that the Lord is loving, and he knows that the Lord is kind because the way the Lord has blessed his master in every way. He appeals to the heart of God. Gentlemen, you want to get something out of your ladies, you better appeal to their character. You say, hey, pretty lady, you're the best cook in the world. I sure am hungry. I bet she'll make you something instead of, hey, can you make me a sandwich? You kind of got to appeal to the character of someone because you're at the mercy of their need, their ability to satisfy your needs. And if you want something from your God, you better know what part of his character can answer your prayer. Because that's a big deal to him, and it should be a big deal to you. So he asked for those things on behalf of his master Abraham. If only we prayed like this more often. Lord, I know you bring peace because your word calls you the Prince of Peace. Will you stay the chaos in my dear sister, my dear brother's life? Will you silence the noise that brings them so much grief and pain? Would you provide a supernatural peace, a peace that passes all understanding? Lord, could you do that? It's hard to ask God for things if you don't know his character. Sometimes you might be asking for things that are contrary to his character. It's our job to understand our God before we ask anything of him. Now notice how Eleazar, how he carries on his prayer. He says, behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of men of the city are coming out to draw water. He goes on to say, there may be many women, I think, are ripe for Isaac. There's going to be a bunch of gals coming here. He's at the hour at the well. This is a social hour for the ladies. They all, in this culture, in this time, it was the ladies' job to go to the well and draw the water and bring it home, to do whatever chores around the house, to provide water for the family. That was their job. And he shows up, and here comes a massive gaggle of ladies coming. And so he's like, Lord, I need you to tell me which one. They're all pretty. I've been on the road for 4 or 5 weeks. Can you help me, God? Can you give me a sign, Lord? May it be that the young woman to whom I say this, Lord, I got to get specific with you. Please let down your jar so that I may drink. And she says, drink, and I'll give water to your camels to drink also. May she be the one whom you decided for your servant Isaac. Not the one I think I like. Not the one that I'm drawn to. But I need to know the one, Lord, that you planned for Isaac to marry. Now, that's a big deal right there. That is a selfless prayer if I've ever heard one. Lord, I don't want to select the wrong one. I'll never hear the end of it from Abraham or Isaac, is probably his thinking. He said, Lord, I need you to intervene, not because it benefits me, but because it benefits my master and his son. And then he gives the reason, the real reason why he wants God to answer it. Yeah, he definitely wants to help Abraham. He definitely wants to help Isaac. It's obvious in his prayer. But then he goes, and by this I will know that you have shown loving kindness to my master. Lord, I want you to reveal your character to me too. I don't want Abraham to get the only blessing. I don't want Isaac to get the only blessing. I want to see how good you are, God. So I need you to answer this prayer. George Mueller once said that he never lets anyone know his needs. He said that if he did, he would always wonder if it was God who met his needs or if it was that person that met his needs. And some of you say it's one and the same, but to George Mueller it was not. As I imagine Eleazar sitting there, what if he were to just start going, if he didn't give this specific prayer to God, what if he were to just start going up and telling those ladies about the mission he is on? Hey, I'm in this town, and I'm looking for a woman for my master's son. They're like, oh, a master, huh? Sounds wealthy. Are those your camels over there? Is that the new model camel? What is all that baggage? Is that a Louis hanging from your camel's side? That looks like a Louis over there. You know, he just looked wealthy coming to that well. What if he'd have just started fishing? Probably wouldn't take him long for some lady wanting to be swooped away from her well-fetching water misery of a life that she was invested in. She probably wanted to have, you know, there's a lot of girls that might be interested in what Eleazar has to offer. And so, he said, God, I need your help. And Lord, if you would do me this righteous, I would experience your loving kindness, and it's going to be awesome. If only we would tell God, now I know your peace. I know what it's like to experience your peace, because nothing in my life suggests I should be calm right now. Yet your word, when I hear it, for some reason, it settles my spirit. Now I know your joy, God, because by your work, I'm wholly satisfied beyond smiles. Sometimes smiling ain't enough. Sometimes you're just happy to the core. That's something the Bible calls joy. Lord, I know that you're in control of my joy. I know that you're in control of my peace. And if I were to tell other people the things that I need, then I might feel like they're satisfying my peace and they're helping me be filled with joy. But if you leave it between you and God, you know for a fact that it is God who has satisfied your soul's need. I think that's the point here. Maybe sometimes we'd hope men would meet our needs because we don't have enough faith in God that He will. And so we tell people we need things. And then God comes out of the blue and answers our prayers without that help. I'm not saying that that's the mission for everybody, but George Mueller believed it. Now let's see how the servant looks for those answered prayers. You ever heard of a smartphone? I got a smart clicker. See. The observant servant. And before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, whom was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, was coming out with her jar on her shoulders. Boy, that was fast. He hadn't even said amen yet. And Rebekah starts walking up and catches attention. Now, I already mentioned that Eleazar asked for a sign. He didn't request for a wonder. He didn't request for a miracle. He asked for a simple sign. And I mean to tell you, when God answers your prayers, it don't matter whether they're simple or complex prayers. They have the same effect. You're just like, wow. It could be a big prayer, it could be a small prayer. When God answers your prayers, it always feels big. Or is that just me? You just find yourself speechless and in awe. Now the young woman, she was very beautiful in appearance, a virgin. No man had known her. And she went down to the spring and she filled her jar and she came up. Then the servant ran to meet her, and he said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. And she said, drink, my lord. She quickly lowered her jar to her hand, and she gave him a drink. And now when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw also for your camels until they have finished drinking. So she hurried, and she emptied her jar into the water channel, and ran again to the well to draw. And she drew for all his camels. And meanwhile, the man who was gazing at her in silence to know whether Yahweh had made his journey successful or not. Before Eleazar even asked, God was already at work. Rebekah was on her way. You want to talk about providential intervention? Sometimes all you got to do is start praying. God's like, hey, I'm glad you finally started praying, but I already had it worked out. Eleazar couldn't even finish his prayer, and God had already arrived in a powerful way. And it just so happens the first woman Eleazar saw at the well, she just happened to fit the entire criteria his master set forth. She was of the proper kindred. She was of the proper religious background. And she had some bonus points too. She was young and very beautiful. A virgin, and no man had ever known her. I tell you what, I'm not sure if Eleazar's prayer had anything to do with the bonus features of this lady, but I guarantee you they didn't hurt either. And when you pray respectfully, and you pray reverently, and you pray in consideration with God's holy word and his holy will, don't be surprised when he does more than just answer your prayers, but he exceeds them. I want you to be ready for him to not just to give you the first or the second step in your mission, but I want you to know that God is willing to look 10 steps into your future because your joy means something to him. But you got to ask him for help. Now let's spend the rest of our time looking at how Rebekah, beyond God's intervention, is a good selection for a wife for Isaac. See, something about Rebekah drew Eleazar's eye. And so he ran to her and he asked, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. And she said, drink, my lord. And she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and she gave him a drink. And she was hospitable. She was respectful. She quickly lowered her jar and she gave him a drink. Not only that, she called him Lord. And not in some weird way like he's a king or something. It's like, it's polite. It's like saying Mr. or Miss or Sir or Madam. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I'll draw also for your camels until they have finished drinking. This is a huge deal, folks. This is not just giving water to somebody's dog. You ever done that? You ever took your little water bottle and you pour a little bit of water in a bowl? That's no big deal. Hey, that's awfully nice of you. But let me tell you this. Camels, if they're empty, they can hold up to 30 gallons of water is what I've heard. 30 gallons of water. How many camels did he have? Anybody didn't graduate Azle High School, how many gallons of water is that total for 30 camels? 300 gallons of water. Now, I've heard of some stranger trying to put $5 in someone's gas tank, right? Yep. You know what I mean? You know, so you're like, I'll put $5 in there for you. But here this guy is. He's got 10 camels and they're sitting on E. It ain't like just going to swipe a card, put the nozzle in there, and it's going to pump the gas in the car. No, in this instance, Rebecca's the pump. And she got to pump a whole lot of gallons out of the ground. Eleazar has 30 vehicles. And it's not pay at the pump. In fact, Rebecca is the pump. She has to pull up 300 gallons of water. And not only that, but she has to carry them to each individual camel. And then she has to sit there and watch them to make sure they're done drinking. That's nearly 2,400 pounds of water. Hand lugged and carried on her head or on her shoulders in flip-flops. Let's also not forget, she's not there just to serve strangers when they wander up with a bunch of thirsty animals. She has her own chores to do. She has her own things to do. And so when she's done taking care of Eleazar and all of his camels, she still has to take care of the business at her own farm. She likely has to load up her own water, tote it a very long way, and still finish the chores that she set aside for this man. This woman's special. Something else she did. She hurried and emptied her jar into the watering channel, and she ran again to the well to draw, and she drew for all the camels. Notice in her effort to water Eleazar, in her effort to water his camels, look what it says she was urgent to do. Get it done. She hurried. She took their thirst serious. She wanted to alleviate their discomfort so bad that she stepped up her pace to do so. How often do we try to help? Let me say it this way. How often do we want someone to help us and they ain't in no hurry to do it? Have you ever been there? This woman wasn't made of that stuff. She wanted to get you back on the road. She wanted to stow your animals away and stow you away. She was special. This is a fine, fine woman. Fine example of a woman. Hospitable, respectful, hardworking, eager, and thoughtful. Sounds like a winner to me. No wonder our last verse says this. Meanwhile, the man, Eleazar, was gazing at her in silence. He's like, dang. You go, Isaac. To know whether Yahweh had made his journey successful or not. He was blown away. He couldn't believe how not only was she perfect, but she was perfect. He's like, Lord, I just got here. Have you already answered my prayers? I've just landed, and the prayer's at the well already. Now I want to talk to you, church, for just a minute about this. Eleazar sought a sign. He told God some conditions that he wanted. And I know I spoke last Sunday that said that Jesus himself said that an evil and adulterous generation would come seeking signs, seeking miracles. In the moment that Jesus spoke this, Pharisees and the Sadducees, they were testing Jesus by asking him for a sign from heaven to prove his authority. That's why Jesus called them evil and sinful, or wicked and faithless, because of their unbelief. Even if there was a sign that he could have gave them, they still wouldn't have believed because their heart was in the wrong place. They hated Jesus. They were mocking him. They were not sincerely looking for the one true God. And so he told them, no sign will be given you except sign of Jonah. Son of Man will go into the earth for 3 days and raise on the third. Just as Jonah went into the belly of a well for 3 days and come out, beaches of Nineveh 3 days later. If you can't see that miracle, you won't see any of the rest. If you can't see the resurrection of Jesus Christ, you're going to have a hard time seeing all the miracles you walk past every day. And so how do we reconcile the actions of Eleazar in this text with what Jesus just said there? Well, when Jesus said an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, those were people who sought signs that were testing Jesus to see if he's really God. If he'll really do miracles before they're going to waste their time trusting in him or putting their faith in him or even believing in him. They wanted some unbelievable miracle to prove as though he hadn't already done so on so many occasions. I can give you a couple. Childbirth is a miracle. We can experience that every day. Just go down to the hospital, go to the turning board, and look at all that awesomeness happen over and over again. You don't believe in the resurrection? Every day a tree drops an acorn, and that acorn's deader than dirt. You can come back in a couple of months, and that acorn is alive and bursting out of the ground with real flavor. Jesus said that would happen to him as a grain of wheat goes into the ground, dies. It's going to spring forth and bear much fruit. He told us to look at these things to believe the miracles, so we have examples. Sign Eleazar seeks, however, is not for his own belief. He's not doing this because he's wondering if God is real or has authority. He's doing this because he don't want to make a mistake in trying to carry out his master's will. He seeks a sign that he might know the loving kindness of God, even the character. He doesn't ask for anything extravagant, doesn't ask for anything over the top. He just asks for something that was equally undeniable, that doesn't tempt the power of God with the unbelief of men. We have another example of somebody else who did this. His name is Gideon, with a fleece. Gideon asked for a sign. He said, Lord, if you want me to go into war, what I need you to do is I need you to put dew on this fleece, and I want the ground dry around it. And when it happened, he didn't believe it. He's like, that was a fluke. So then he reversed it. He said, you know what, God, maybe that was the sign I was looking for, but I don't know. Let's try you again. How about we do this? How about this time you give me a dry fleece and you make the ground all around it wet? God answered both prayers appropriately. I want you to know, I don't think any of us should seek some like outlandish sign. I think there's plenty of little things we can ask for that God can easily perform without moving a mountain, without blotting out the sun, without making it rain for 30 days straight. The purposes of these two signs that Gideon and the servant asked for was to seek confirmation of God's word, to seek guidance in God's will. Not all asking for signs is wrong. But here's what I'm going to ask you. Are you asking because you doubt God? Or you want to tempt God? Or because you're ready to obey him and you are needing confirmation in some decision that you're about to make that's to honor God? Or maybe something that's going to favor someone other than yourself? These are the takeaways I have from Gideon and this servant when it comes to asking for signs. I would ask you to exercise on the caution of these two individuals here, because both men were answered. Both men were blessed for asking, and they weren't condemned for it. They weren't hated for it. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I thank you for this text and this look into the beginnings of Isaac's future. Lord, I just pray, God, that if we have many people in here that are eligible and are looking for somebody, I pray, God, that you would draw the perfect mate to them. I pray, God, that they would be wise enough to examine that person before they just dive in. They would examine their character. They would check for hospitable characteristics. Most importantly, God, maybe they would find somebody godly. Lord, I know that Christianity really does teach word for word how to have a healthy and happy marriage. And if you would just select somebody in that direction, Lord, I know you'd be blessed for it. I can testify to my own wife. I pray, God, that young adults in here, as they're getting older, I pray, Lord, that they would have criteria. They would have standards. And those standards wouldn't be built around money or physique or good looks alone or any of those things without the other. But most importantly, God, I pray that they would just look and see if the person's a good person, a hard worker and thoughtful and caring and godly. I pray, Lord, that you would be with that person today. And I pray, God, if there's anybody in here just trying to figure out what your will is for their life, or they're trying to figure out how to accomplish something with their life, and they just don't know where to go or how to go. First of all, God, I pray that they would just put your faith in Jesus Christ. With or without a sign, that is good enough. And you'll take the rest. They would just trust you. Know that you're sovereignly in control, behind the scenes, working all things out to the good of those who know and love the Lord. If they would start there, Lord, that would be the best place to start, not with some sign or some miracle. But Lord, if there's a Christian in here trying to figure out if there's right job knocking at the door, the right housing opportunity, the right opportunities in general that scare them, I pray, God, that, Father, you'd hear their petitions and their need for answers, and I pray, God, that you would give them all the evidence and signs they need to make the right decision that honors your Son, Jesus, and also makes their life less stressful. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. I didn't print prayer requests and lists.